the Social Involvement Committee of Phoenix Foundation is pleased to announce that copies of Handbook of Personal Finance, authored by Ms. Ellen Cabrera, are now available at the Phoenix office. Please contact the Secretariat for interested parties. Does your CFO have what it takes to receive the coveted Everlasting Excellence Trophy? Visit our website at www.ingphoenixcfoftheyear.com to know more about the nomination. We would now like to thank our year-round sponsors. To our platinum sponsors, KPMG, RG Manabat and Company, and Union Bank of the Philippines. To our gold sponsors, Ayala Land Inc., Filipina Shell Petroleum Corporation, and SGV and Company. And to our patron sponsors, BDO Unibank Inc., P&A Grant Thornton, and San Miguel Corporation. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the PHNET Special General Membership Meeting. This is presented by the Programs and Meetings Committee. May I call on our host for today. He is the 1981 PHNET President and currently the Chairman and President of Amber Properties, Inc. Let us all welcome Mr. Archit Bartolome.
A pleasant good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to this special general membership meeting of Phoenix. It is so special because we have a very special guest of honor and speaker this afternoon. Are you aware that this is the first non-virtual public speaking engagement of Governor Medalla? It goes to show how special Phoenix is with Governor Medalla. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as we give him a big round of applause. Salamat, Governor. At this point, may I call on President Mike to call this meeting to order.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you, Archit. I would like to call this special general membership meeting of Phoenix to order.
Thank you, Mike. May I request everybody to rise? Let us pause for a moment as you all offer a solemn prayer for the eternal repose of the soul of former President Fidel Valdez Ramos. Let perpetual light shine upon him, and may he rest in peace. Amen. I remain standing until after the invocation and the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Heavenly Father, you are our Creator, our light, our wisdom and strength. May we ask for your guiding hand to lead us through this forum today and every day as we accomplish our work and various tasks. We pray for joy, enthusiasm, and fulfillment in our work. May we conduct ourselves and our business dealings in an environment of fairness, respect, and compassion. May we ask you to enter the hearts and minds of our leaders and countrymen. Give them strength, wisdom, so that they may lead us through these difficult times with honesty, integrity, humility, and selflessness. Finally, we pray that you extend your healing hand over us, our families, and our nation, and help us overcome this health crisis that has claimed so many lives, including the lives of many of our friends, family members, and colleagues. Please heal those who are sick and guide the hands and minds of our doctors and nurses as they care for them. All these we humbly pray. Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated. May I now call on our President Mike Orin for his president's time.
Thank you again, Archit. So, BSP Governor Felipe Medalla. Yes, sir. Okay. And Senior Assistant Governor, Ms. Edna Villa. Thank you for gracing our event. Phoenix directors, officers, and members, both present here in New World and those who dial in via Zoom. Our guests, a pleasant good afternoon to everyone. So for today, we are privileged to have the opportunity to listen to one of the pillars of the economic team of our country, the sixth governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Dr. Felipe Medalla. It is not every day, not even every year, for that matter, that business people get to listen firsthand and in person to Governor Medalla. So I hope that all of us are here prepared to listen very attentively and to listen and to watch his presentation and hopefully participate in our Q&A and panel discussions that will follow. We'd like to think that Phoenix as an organization has been fortunate to have the dear governor as a guest in several Phoenix economic briefings in the past and general membership meetings or GMMs. The most recent one would be our May 2022 GMM before the current governor found out that he would be, fortunately for the country, appointed as the next governor of the BSP. For that, Governor, we are always grateful. Thank you very much for always making time for us. Being the head of BSP, Gov Medalla is primarily charged to maintain price stability that is conducive to a balanced and sustainable growth of the economy and employment. In addition, we all know he takes the lead in promoting and maintaining monetary stability in the country. I mention these things because as financial executives and leaders of our organizations, I would like to think that the priorities of the BSP and that of the governor mirror our own concerns and aspirations. When we, your Phoenix Institute Board, started identifying the priorities and therefore activities of Phoenix for the year, we were still right in the middle of the pandemic. We wanted our theme to center around aspects that we thought were scarce during that time. So that was late 2021. We felt that the country was scarce of having enough market confidence, number one, and number two, having a more positive outlook in the marketplace. Hence, our theme for the year. Hopefully, you've seen some of our banners there. Our theme is inspiring market confidence and empowering positive change. Throughout all of our activities, starting January 1, 2022, that has always been our central theme and objective. and other overlaps. No? In the area of payments, for example, the BSP has its digital payments transformation roadmap for 2020 and 2023. It is the BSP's thrust to promote digitalization of payments and, in parallel, furthering financial inclusion. As we believe that those two things, digital payments and financial inclusion, are mutually reinforcing. So within Phoenix, just to prove that it mirrors what the BSP and the governor has been prioritizing, we actively support the growth of digital payments, actively being pursued through our ICT committee. And our liaison director, Zondi Garcia, is here. Zondi, for your presence as well. We were just actually in a meeting yesterday with Secretary Ivan Uy of the DICT. And one of the main agenda items that we discussed would be digital payments, how to make sure that it reaches the farthest of islands within the country. In addition, in the area of financial inclusion, actually Phoenix is a member of all the working groups working with the FISC, or the Financial Inclusion Steering Committee. This is part of the strategy framework of the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion, or NSFI, for the years 2022 to 2028. And we look forward to participating in all the meetings later this month. So a lot of exciting and action-packed collaboration involving the BSP and Phoenix. And I've not even mentioned yet the fact that both Phoenix and the BSP are members of the CMDC, Capital Markets Development Council, where Phoenix is the co-chair representing the private sector, and BSP is our partner, together with all other government and private organizations and entities. So I could go on citing instances where the initiatives of the BSP and Phoenix may seem to overlap and support each other. There are more, for sure, of such overlaps, but that's for another meeting, another session. So for today, focus is on the governor. Again, I would like to reiterate how happy we are to have the governor with us. Thank you, sir, for your leadership during these interesting times for the country. We look forward to hearing and learning a lot from you this afternoon. So thank you, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your lunch, and mabuhay ang Phoenix.
At this point, may I call on Secretary Romy Bernardo to introduce our guest of honor and speaker.
Thank you, President Archit. Dr. Philip Medalla is a noted economist and educator whose career spans more than 4 decades and the administration of 4 presidents. He has been a member of the Monetary Board since July 2011. He was appointed by the former President Benigno Aquino III and was given a second term by President Rodrigo Duterte in July 2017. Before joining the Monetary Board, he was a professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics, where he served as a dean for 4 years starting 1994. He also served under the administration of former Presidents Joseph Estrada and Fidel Ramos as Secretary of Socioeconomic Planning and Director General of the National Economic and Development Authority and member of the Presidential Task Force on Tax and Tariff Reform, respectively. Dr. Medalla earned his PhD in economics from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and has an MA in economics from the University of the Philippines. He graduated cum laude from De La Salle University with a BA in Commerce, Economics, and Accounting degree. Please help me welcome Dr. Governor Philip Medalla and give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Well, I will not address anybody in particular because I feel like all of you are my friends, right? So, mga kaibigan, uh, first of all, I'd like to say that for some reason, my last non-virtual public speech was with Phoenix also, right? With Camco, and yes, Manhid, and okay, and then my first public speech again is with Phoenix. So you really must be my favorite. So I thank you for inviting me to share my views on the latest developments in the Philippine economy, and of course, from the point of view of a central banker. Not from the point of view of an EDA Director General, which I used to be. Not even the point of view of a professor of economics, which I will forever be. Okay, so the joke was when I was teaching economics, my voice was so loud, even the people working in the canteen learned some economics. Okay, so let me start by saying that these are really truly difficult times and quite unique for two reasons. We were starting from monetary policy that was meant to speed up the recovery of the economy from nearly a 10% contraction. Indeed, I remember Romy asked me to say something, speak before the Abuitis group. And what I said to myself was, if I can compute GDP per week, because that's too expensive, right? What would the contraction look like? And my answer was, the worst 2 weeks of the Philippine economy were the last 2 weeks of the first quarter. Because an economy that was initially growing at 6% contracted by 1%, when in fact there are only 2 weeks of lockdown. So 2 divided by how many weeks in a quarter? 8. Okay. Times 1% times. When you do that, you compute backwards, the rate of contraction was actually 20%. Okay, if that had continued, if the last 2 weeks of March had continued for the rest of the year, the economy would have been 20% smaller. Of course, fortunately, we learned along the way. We learned which ways of dealing with, well, we found out that certain things hurt us more than the virus. Okay? Like motorcycles, the rider must have a wing so that the person behind him. Okay, so lots of not so good things, right? Or do not walk around the village. I mean, okay, that's. So when you look at it, we did learn along the way and cope with it better and better. And of course, we got vaccinated. And then many of us got infected. And apparently that's better than getting vaccinated, assuming you're still alive, no? So those together, plus our policies. Literally, we did not just throw in the kitchen sink, we also threw in the bathtub, okay? Okay. Never, okay, can you move to the slide later? Okay, so you're seeing this contraction, okay, and the recovery that you eventually are seeing. And I'd like to attribute that what? How much? How much was it the first quarter? 8.3%. No? And I think the second quarter will be great too. So it worked. Okay, so, and then of course, if things go well, we'll be returning to the pre-pandemic growth, which averaged 6.5%. By the way, those 10 years before the pandemic were quite exceptional. Growth was both high and inclusive. I don't know why, but maybe it's because the rate of growth of wage and salary employment was very high. Meanwhile, unpaid family workers were declining. So really a true sign of us becoming a more and more market-oriented formal sector economy. So all of those things were happening. Okay, next slide, please. But of course, even before we threw in, okay, so let me repeat again what we did, 2% policy rate. Never in the history of Philippines, since we became an independent central bank, or even before, did we have 2% policy rate. Of course, that's understandable. The midpoint of inflation target is 3. So 2% would be negative. Even under the most normal times, 2% will be negative policy rate. And if the inflation is 6%, in real terms, the policy rate is even more negative. So we had an exit plan. Okay, believe me, while we were doing all of this, we were already thinking of exit plan. Of course, you can say, is the exit plan, if you follow the Scottish poet Robert Burns, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. By the way, they're not. They're not awry, they just have to be massively adjusted. The plan is still the same, except it will be way ahead. In other words, the lift up of interest rate will be way ahead. And the size, as shown by our 75 basis point of cycle increase, is of course, by the way, that was meant to be. Okay, I thought that 25 and a surprise 75 is more dramatic than 250s. Right? Okay, 250s that are regular meetings inferior to 25 and 75 that you did not expect. Okay? In other words, the market had to be jolted too. That, you know, this central bank is not staying idly by. By the way, I probably read the accounts by Dax Lucas and the other journalists of what supposedly went through. By the way, it's true that I didn't know how to get Bible group. So I asked my wife, can you do this for me, please? Okay. And I had to contact all the monetary board members. Let's meet tomorrow, and this is what we plan to do. Unfortunately, they were fully supportive. That's the other advantage I have. I have a dynamic board. We disagree a lot, but we are never disagreeable. Well, if you look at Tony Abacan, it's very hard for him to be disagreeable. Even when he's angry, he is very well dressed. Okay, so I'm lucky to have that board. Okay, so by the way, we bought 1 trillion worth of government securities on a balance sheet of 4.5 trillion. And we lent 600 billion to the national government. Okay, so now we have to exit from that. And the plan was exit maybe the first month of the fourth quarter gradually. Okay, so the plan was 0.25 maybe in October, November, December, right? And gradually winning the government out of this cheap money. Now, of course, the ongoing debate in the United States about inflation is you had team small, team low and transitory, and team large and not transitory. By the way, the Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman was wrong, and actually he wrote a column trying to explain why he's wrong. Okay, so now we have to speed up everything, and that's what you see. Now, why did we do it? Okay, the normal textbook inflation targeting central bank cares about exchange rate only as it inputs in the model to the inflation rate. So in other words, whatever interest you have in the exchange rate is because it affects the inflation rate. And the normal situation is when changes in the exchange rate are small and transitory, they hardly translate to inflation. However, if it's large and in one direction, we have to compute what we call longer run elasticities. In the first case, the elasticity was what, 0.06, 0.1. By the way, I bragged about this in a meeting with Thailand. We were so good in inflation targeting. Small changes in the exchange rate now just translate to at most 0.1. 1% translates to 0.1, maybe even 0.06. You know, the Thai said, well, in our case, it's 0.04, 0.03. Okay. So, kaya ayoko na magyabang kasi yun pala, mas magaling sila sa atin eh. Okay, so that's what happened. We now see, it's no longer, we're not seeing small changes, and possibly then all our elasticities are much higher. The other way to look at it is we're plotting a line across points, but the points are very clustered together, so you get a nice line. But maybe the line is really nonlinear, right? So it doesn't. So there's a very nice split in the middle, but actually it goes like that. So that's the other reason we are a lot more worried. Now the other thing is, unlike the textbook inflation targeting central bank, we are an Asian inflation targeting central bank. What does that mean? We do care about exchange rate volatility. We think we should have some, because having none, we look like an insurance company. The Bangko Sentral has insured the exchange rate. Let's all borrow in foreign currency because the interest rate is lower there. So we like volatility, but excessive volatility we don't like. Not only that, there gets to be a point that we also care about the level. For instance, if the exchange rate were to move to 35, that is going to be disastrous because wages will not fall. So Philippine products measured in dollars, Philippine workers measured in dollars become expensive. And that is why we tend to accumulate reserves when the currency is appreciating. And when I first entered the central bank, it took courage on the part of Tetangco to borrow 2.5 trillion to grow the reserves from 45 to 85. Of course, we lost money at that time because our reserves were earning much less than our policy rate. But that was a fantastically good decision from a long-run standpoint. Now, we also care a lot about the exchange rate when it's moving up too fast. Because who will believe our inflation targets? To use terrible economist speak, it will disanchor inflationary expectations. So these are all the reasons we have to consider. So I went further and signaled that next meeting is going to be, it's not 0, it's not 75. So, which, if you have it's like spell pig, I give you P and I give you G, you should be able to guess I, right? So, that's how it is. Okay, so Now, we are confident, however, okay, but we have other things. We want to develop the relationship more between GS markets and our policy rate. So, unfortunately, we were able to get amendments of our charter so we can borrow directly from the public. By the way, historically, why was that removed from the powers of the central bank? It was a reaction to the Jobo bills. So Jobo bills, people say, bawal na yan. No more borrowing from the public. Now, well, for technical reasons, borrowing from the public is better than borrowing from the banks because the banks can change their mind and lend the money. Whereas the people who are there to save money, putting it in our securities, most likely are going to roll over it. They have no intention of lending it to anybody because they need it for retirement and things like that. So in other words, we now have more permanent ways of sterilization. So we got powers we didn't have before. By the way, we're also asking for more powers. Like, pambira naman, BSP supervisors are not allowed to look at bank accounts. When the owner of the bank, by the way, these are usually small banks, not Phoenix types, are stealing from their own bank, right? Okay, so, sada naman, at least ang banking supervisor hindi covered ng secrecy. Hindi ba? Paano niya malalaman kung sino nanloloko, ano? You know, those are the things we're asking for still. Anyway, I need your support. We need your support there. You know, if bank secrecy is too important to the political system, okay, at least don't make it paralyze and disable your banking supervisors. Okay, I hope I can get your support in that regard. By the way, the other way to look at things is to contrast us with Thailand. Is Thailand there? Yeah. What you will see is Thailand hardly moved policy rates. We have already moved by 125. Why? They have more dollars to sell. But actually, when you sell dollars, you're actually tightening monetary policy. Your pesos are going back to the central bank. So they have more to spare. And actually, by the way, I will not reveal how much we sold. What we will tell you just is the decline in reserves, which is not all sales, because some of it is withdrawal by government. Okay, but this gives you a rough idea what it is, right? We were 108. Now we're about 100. When you look at Thailand, the dollar sales were much larger. Okay, they have this luxury, bigger reserves. We, on the other hand, think our reserves are comfortable but not excessive. And this is not the time to waste our bullets. Okay, so this is the comparison of the two. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then, as I already pointed out, when you look at is it yellow? The yellow line, the policy rate, even after the increase, okay, if you look at that endpoint, is still significantly lower than it used to be. So it will not kill the economy. Yeah. So in other words, by the way, it's in comparison to the inflation rate, because the inflation rate, okay, the policy rate is higher. The policy rate is higher now, but the inflation rate is even higher. And in fact, our forecast, the midpoint of our forecast for next year is 4.2, which I will talk about later. So relative to our own forecast, year ahead forecast of what the inflation rate will be next year, the policy rate is still negative in real terms. So we can afford to step on the brakes without killing, okay, economists again are fond of using these numbers, nascent economic growth. Okay, look up nascent in the dictionary. You can see it in a song like I grew up. La Donda po, de Gracia. So you would see, you see those things. Okay, now, and what you will see, the other thing that you will see is that a lot of the inflation is really supply shocks. Okay, so, okay, the next slide will show you that. Because if you take out the extreme values and get the averages, that tells you what the more regular inflation is. So, of course, the problem is oil and also non-oil imports became very expensive. Now, the hope is that sooner or later these prices will normalize. By the way, this is not sustainable if this will be forever. Because we revised our current account deficit. Well, the current account deficit is take out all the capital flows from the capital flows and investment flows, and what remains is goods and services, okay, and remittances. And of course, the declaration of dividends of foreigners to their home country and all of those things. And you will notice that the revision there was huge. The numbers we had before was 5 billion, I think, EV, right? And now about 20 billion for the year. Now, this is a question we are often asked. How are you going to finance that? And my brief answer is, this is why some depreciation of the peso is healthy. People with FCDO accounts will change their mind and convert some of that to pesos. If you think that pesos appreciation is temporary, you might as well change it now, right? So in a sense, we're lucky we have the FCDU system, right? You can consider that our second level reserves. I do not remember what the levels are now, but they're easily what 40. Yeah, right. So okay, this is another thing working for us. But of course, if this will last forever, then we will not be able to consistently finance this. Of course, the forecast is the oil prices will eventually begin to go down, as shown by the futures prices. And then the other good sign is that both Russia and Ukraine want to show the world they're the more responsible warriors, you know? And therefore will not touch the food area. Okay, so all of those things. Now, okay, now let me go back to inflation forecast. As I said, this, by the way, this will be revised. If you can see, our own forecast is 4.2%, I think. Our own forecast, yeah, 4.2%. By midpoint of our forecast is 4.2, which is above 4%. We've been revising this with the new numbers, and I will, Francis Dakila will kill me if I tell you what the numbers are. So I'll say lower than 4. Okay, so that's the revision. So now we have a better than 50-50 chance to do lower than 4. And that's why we're doing 25 or 50 next meeting. To make sure that enough follow through for that to happen. Because we're quite confident there's still sufficient momentum for growth. Now, what if I'm wrong? I still won't regret it because GDP growth is not one of our 3 pillars. And we believe that in the long run, credible inflation targets result in higher growth in the long run. Okay, the other way to look at it is the moment inflation is out of control, unavoidably, large output has to be lost to kill it. And then the best memory of that is Volcker. Because everyone before him couldn't control inflation because every time output will fall, they will backtrack. And the market knows that. So interest rate cuts do not generate reduction of employment. Now, they meet a guy like Volcker, who famously said, the only financial innovation that is always good, because he doubted many derivatives are good for society, is the ATM machine, okay? That's the guy you're dealing with, smoking his $2 cigar. And he was not backing down. And then when people believed him, inflation started. But output was lost while he was gaining credibility. Okay, so this is the lesson. Unless you're willing to live with high inflation forever, high inflation will eventually result in lower output, because bringing it down will always, the larger it is, the chances of bringing down inflation without bringing down growth are near zero. In other words, you can fly the plane, but you cannot land. Or if you land, you're no longer in the plane, you're in a parachute. The plane will be destroyed. Okay, this is the reason we are very, very firm about our three pillars. The first of which is price stability. Okay, so of course you all know already that we will definitely exceed 4% this year. And there's very little we can do about it. Singapore asked itself that question. When you have these powerful global forces about which you can do little, meaning when the central banker of the world mismanages inflation and tries to cut it, everybody will be hurt. I think it was one of the finance secretaries, the treasury secretaries of the US said, the dollar is our currency and it is your problem. Okay, the other one is, in Japan, it's called the Nixon shock. Of course, the Japanese will call it Nixon shoku. What's that? US Finance Secretary. Oh, by the way, guys, the dollar is pegged to gold. And from now on, forget it. Of course, Japan was holding all these dollars based on the promise that it was pegged to gold. And in just one speech, it's gone. So, of course, the French call it the exorbitant privilege. You actually partially default on your debt by raising inflation. Okay, but of course, we do not have that option because 98% of our foreign debt is not denominated in pesos. On the other hand, the US exactly the opposite. 100% of its foreign debt is in US dollars. Okay, so therefore, by the way, if you look at the numbers again, next slide, you will see that our depreciation is not exactly out of line. There are countries that are more depreciated than us, and there are countries that are less depreciated than us. By the way, before I did the 75, we were neck and neck with the Korean won. Okay, so the 75 worked. But as I said, if the central banker does too many surprises, nobody will believe him anymore. So this is my last surprise in my term, which will end next year. Okay, so no, I hate surprises actually, and every central banker hates surprises, but there are times where it is necessary. Okay, so. What is our view on the dollar? It's healthy most of the time. It sends the right signals if it changes relative prices. Relative prices, those things that are relatively expensive, consume less, produce more. Those things that are relatively cheap, buy more, produce less, right? So this is the classic invisible hand of Smith. But the problem with the exchange rate is it could For instance, if you are going to allow this kind of depreciation rate, why should we believe that you can achieve 2 to 4%, right? Isn't that a logical question to ask? A central bank that doesn't care if the depreciation rate is 7% or 8%, clearly cannot be serious about its 2 to 4, right? Therefore, we have to act. Now, it turns out that, by the way, if you look at the studies done by BIS, they say the Asian way is correct. That central banker should have two tools, which is the interest rate and intervention in markets. Also, the other lesson from the Asian financial crisis is capital can be volatile, and the IMF can be ruthless in telling you no more money is coming at the time when money is leaving. Therefore, you have large contractions. So having reserves is a good form of being counter-cyclical with respect to the rest of the world. Now, of course, but this is a digression. As you manage the exchange rate, there will be periods when it's close to the upper and the lower range, especially the upper range. No, the lower range. When everybody's sure you're fighting appreciation. That's the best time to borrow from abroad and place your money in the central bank. By the way, that's not allowed. We caught a bank doing that and we told them to return all the interest. And they said, boss, we 20% withholding tax. Can we just return the net? No, we said no. Get it from Kim. So, you know how difficult that is, getting money back from Kim Inares. Okay, so, yeah, so, but fortunately, because we believe, precisely we believe that the lesson from the financial crisis is we must be able to take care of ourselves when capital markets become unreliable. I think it's Romeo who said, markets can remain irrational longer than you can stay liquid or solvent. Now, it's costly, very low return, but at the same time, when you see bad times like this, especially if you contrast the Philippines and Thailand, they could afford not to budge the policy rate because they had the large reserves. Of course, the problem there is as you sell reserves, you're actually tightening monetary policy already. So you might as well make it official. Okay? Now, okay, I think I'm getting closer to the good news. Okay, our policy rates are still accommodative, as you can see from the chart. Okay, next chart, please. Yes. Okay, the policy rate, as it goes up, is actually not even keeping up with the inflation rate. Of course, as the inflation rate goes down, then of course the real policy rate becomes less negative. Okay, and we're still providing support for the recovery thus far, even with the increase I already said will happen in August and maybe the rest of the year. By the way, in the case of Thailand, I read that they finally will start lifting off. One forecast is 250s, and there'll be 2.5. Okay, so this is the kind of environment we're here. Now, of course, the banking system remains stable. Okay. Udena or no Udena? Okay, so no, I'm just kidding. Okay. By the way, when you compute the direct exposure of banks, it's actually quite small relative to the system. Of course, there can be indirect exposure. Yes, suppliers, he didn't pay, and that supplier in turn will not pay, and so on and so forth. But the more I look at it, the more convinced I am that, well, thank God to the people in this room who are probably working for the banks. The banks have learned the lessons from the Asian financial crisis. Most of you were young, middle-level executives at that time, and now presidents, and that lesson is still fresh and nearly embedded in your brain. Thank God. Okay, the banking system remains stable and resilient. The capital adequacy ratio is 17.1 solo and 16.5 consolidated. Now to a little advertising about the BSP. We're continuing with our own dialogue with the banks and the private sector on monitoring of large exposures. You must remember, we value your views. We will not always say we agree with you, but we oftentimes when we hear your views, we do change our mind or modify our policies because many times your feedback is very useful. And of course, we are keen on continuing this dialogue with the industry. We will have a second package of regulations on environmental sustainability, providing gradual expectations on management of environment and social risk in relation to credit and operational risk exposure of the Philippines. By the way, we are not a big factor in global warming. It's sad to say we are not very good in industrialization. Huh? But at the same time, clearly there will be risks involved that will change. Let me give you an example. Very hard to finance a coal-fired plant because no international insurer will insure it. So these are the things we have to adjust to. Of course, digital is extremely important, and BSP has developed a cybersecurity roadmap covering 3 areas, namely capacity building, collaborative engagement, and continuing policy framework and supervisory enhancements to institutionalize resilience to cyber attacks. Okay, so of course, we're also lobbying that no more anonymous SIM cards because they're a major tool for fooling people. Okay, we want to digitalize. We hope to digitalize at least half of retail payments and ensure that at least 70% of Filipino adults should have transactions accounts by 2023. Our major tool there is, of course, the basic deposits accounts. Okay, so what is my key takeaway? By the way, this is a language that we are very careful about. The BSP stands ready to employ all necessary policy actions to bring inflation towards a target consistent path over the medium term. In other words, we'll try very hard to hit it by next year. If we don't hit by next year, we're going to definitely hit it the year after. Hopefully next year rather than the year after. I remarked when I heard BSP stands ready, I said, this is not correct. Even when we're sitting, we're still ready, right? So we will continue to foster an enabling environment for our financial institutions under supervision. For instance, we are very keen on reducing the reserve requirements because those that we do not regulate don't have reserve requirements. The last thing we want to do is handicap those that we regulate. But of course, we got no choice because you are managing depositors' money. And if you look at every bank, at least 70%, maybe even 80% of your lending is not your money, but the depositors. It is our duty to make sure that the depositors' interests are protected. Okay, and the BSP recognizes and advocates for increased role of digital platforms in achieving both greater efficiency and financial inclusion. When I look at how e-wallets have contributed to inclusiveness, but let me tell you a personal story. The yaya that brought up our youngest, yung youngest kasi namin pahabol eh. So lahat ng pictures namin wala siya. Sabi, Dad, bakit wala ako dyan? Kasi nahuli ka eh. Okay, so, the, uh, during the pandemic, my wife got a text from Yaya, who was already married. Uh, they they couldn't, they have nothing, they cannot work, and the promised ayuda had not come yet. And my wife said, "Oh, how can we send you money?" Oh, he said, "Oh, this is a sari store next to us. Send money to her GCash." Well, I would have said pay Maya kasi meron na niya si Romy. So kaya ginawa ko na lang ng GCash. Uh, 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 and the money got there and she paid only 100 pesos. I will not tell you how much my wife gave her. But to them, that was a lifeline. And to me, when I see all of these examples of how people-to-people transfers are made this year, especially during the pandemic, this is more important than all the macroeconomic numbers. Because after all, what good are the nice macroeconomic numbers if they are not felt by everyone? So, thanks in advance for your support for BSP initiative. Salamat for this opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Governor. Outstanding message. We learned a lot from you. It was a mouthful. The governor has consented to answer your questions and to react to your comments. Let me introduce the members of the panel. Of course, we have Secretary Romy Bernardo, the president of Lazaro Bernardo Teo and Associates, supported by Sondi Garcia. Sondi, senior consultant of ING Asia for challengers and growth markets, and also attorney Uni Mata Perez, executive vice president of Phoenix. Should you have any question, we can have the porta microphone here, or you can write it down, okay, and give it to the panelists. Before we start the question and answer, yeah, no problem. Sorry. Before we go to the question and answer, Romy, if I were to introduce Governor Medalla, in addition to the brilliant resume or the medal achievements and accomplishments, I would say he is a true-blooded Maroon. Okay? I agree. And I will also say that he is a dedicated follower of the Golden State Warriors. Okay, go ahead, Romy.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I just took over somebody's role, but since I'm already here, let me say that I think I reflect everybody's views in saying that I know no one where I can learn so much in such a short time and so painlessly and with a smile on my face. I don't know anyone like that.
Yeah.
Salamat po. Salamat. I'm going to raise a question that I've heard from another forum I was in. And a big part of the response of monetary authorities globally, especially the US, is the inflation rate. We don't know whether it's transitory or not. But what are your expectations? Somebody likened the policy tool as antibiotic. You don't stop taking it even after nawala na yung disease. So that you probably have to have, at least at the policy rate side, still high. But you also have a situation of the winding down of a credit cycle of cheap interest rates. Would you care to share with us your views on what you see to be the medium to long-term view on what interest rates will be like globally?
I don't think there will be substantial QE. So much of the action will be rates. Okay. In other words, for background, before the financial crisis, the Fed's combined balance sheet of all the Feds was 0.9 trillion. It's now 7.5 trillion. Okay, so that's very strange territory. We have never seen, we cannot learn from history what will happen. Because 7.5 trillion to what? Okay, but I think they will be very, very circumspect before they really shrink the balance sheets. Now, my view about interest rate is very secular, which is as people age, saving for old age becomes a powerful motive for saving. But at the same time, if you're old, you don't have enough workers, so there's not enough demand for capital. So therefore, we will see relatively low interest rates for a long time, for as long as people believe the Fed. Okay, and right now, there's no reason not to believe them, because the politics of it is more people, the intensity of public feeling towards inflation is actually stronger than support for economic growth. Okay, so in the surveys of Mahar Mangas, for instance, the level of satisfaction is barely correlated with growth, but very highly correlated with inflation. Okay, so that's my view, that you will not see again a period of high inflation in the advanced economies. They're genuinely trying to bring it down. Okay, and the reason I think this way is the bond markets think this way. You hardly see the long-term bonds moving. Even in our case, the movements in the longer-term bonds much lower than the movements of the short-term rates. So the view that I take is that the global environment and what Larry Summers calls secular stagnation will remain the condition, and we're not returning to long-term bonds in the US that were, what, 7%, 8%. Now, by the way, that's good for the Philippines because it's easier to outgrow debt. Okay, that's still our scenario. They'll outgrow the debt. Of course, if you listen to the cabinet, one member is saying maybe we need new taxes. That's Balisacan. Yeah. And there are people who are hoping that growth will solve our problems. But I think one thing is true about the Philippines. No matter what happens, we somehow manage to find the correct macro fiscal monetary solutions. It's amazing the long-term continuity of those reforms. And I credit this to both the backgrounds of the economic managers, which tend to be the same, no unorthodox crazy guy, right? And also the civil society, which includes PNEX, MAP, Philippine Economic Society, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's why I remain optimistic that our macro and fiscal management will see us through. So the real problem is the real sector reforms, and even there I am somewhat optimistic because, for instance, the Public Service Act relaxed the definition of which areas can get foreign ownership. And if Robin Padilla succeeds, the Constitution will be changed, no? Okay, so I'm on the whole optimistic, but really it's not easy. It's not easy to have twin deficits because this time you have to convince foreigners to finance you. That kind of mindset could be quite fickle. They may like you this time, but all of a sudden they don't like you anymore.
Okay. Before I ask my question, Governor, Thank you for that crash course in economics. Now I understand what you said earlier, that you will forever be a UP professor in economics. I really learned a lot. But I also have to correct something that you said. I'm no longer with ING, effective July 1. So I just wanted to say, okay, my question. Now, one of the things that people say as the reason why it's a lot more difficult for central banks to manage the interest is really there's so much liquidity. I mean, you alluded to it in terms of the depegging from the gold, right? And somehow the different central banks have printed a lot of money, to address the GFC, and that has not been mapped. And of course, the pandemic, more money has been printed. So much money floating around. What is your take on that? Because that's also the reason why cryptocurrency became popular, right? Because there's so much money floating around. So how can really this money that's floating around be, mapped efficiently and make the central banks again be able to manage inflation more effectively?
In our case, for instance, suppose we sold the 1 trillion securities that we have. Okay, so what will happen? Bond prices will fall, which means interest rates will rise. So that's why that territory of monetary policy is very difficult. The extent to which to what extent will a rise, a fall in bond prices, which effectively is a rise in interest rate, to what extent will that kill the economy? But for us, we ask simple questions. How much of the securities are banks holding? And how much will that affect their capital? And therefore the lending. So these are not, it's easier, it's harder than riding a bicycle, of course, because as long as you're moving forward, but it's also easier than walking a tightrope. So it's somewhere in between. Now, the US is even harder. Remember, they printed the money not by financing government, but buying assets. So again, what happens if you sell the assets? So that's really unexplored territory.
So the genie is out. You cannot bring it back, right?
Well, you have to. Okay, the hope is as the economy grows, it becomes small relative to the economy. So in that sense, just not adding to it, if you take a very long view, just not adding to it will eventually solve the problem. The problem there is it's not eventually, it's eventually. Okay, so so that's the problem.
But Gob, that's a follow-up question, right? I mean, like, the market has become addicted to the fact that, okay, if a problem happens, that the central banks will again do the same because it was effective.
Okay.
And if I look, because you also mentioned about one of the things that the central bank will do, the Philippines, is also look at large exposures. And let's face it,
Right.
there has been a lot of leverage that happened that because of cheap money.
Yeah, but thankfully, our balance sheet expansion is nowhere near the US.
Yes, but
And our growth rate, because we are an emerging economy, will be higher. Okay, so all of those things. And then the problem is if we have to borrow from abroad, because then you have to convince the foreigners to buy our bonds. Now, because we are going through a period where people are gradually moving to the age where they're thinking of saving for retirement. So savings will rise. The formal sector is also growing. The reach of banks, for instance, if you look at how both the Maya and GCash are appealing to the public, and hopefully more and more products become available, and hopefully insurance companies become bigger and become buyers of longer term bonds. So it has to be also coupled with capital. In the case of the Philippines, our advantage is our capital markets are not yet fully developed, and their development will effectively absorb many of these things.
So you're comfortable at the level of leverage of the big companies.
Yeah. And then, in reality, we are not as leveraged.
As the US.
Yes. And okay, this one is a harder thing to assess. I don't think our real estate is as overpriced. But again, that's a hard thing to assess. So those are, and then as I said, our banks are adequately capitalized. We sometimes do some exercises like what will happen to banks if the
Stress testing.
yeah, what will happen to the banks if your government securities prices drop because we sold you 1 trillion? And then when we look at the banks, many of them can absorb it. So now, okay. So if at all, what scares me is that right now the deficit is bigger than interest plus capital expenditures.
Deficit to GDP, sir?
No, the deficit in pesos
Okay.
is bigger than, in other words, we're borrowing not just for paying interest. By the way, if you borrow to pay interest, okay, if you borrow to pay, okay, suppose interest rate is 6, and inflation is 3. If you refinance half the interest, you're actually keeping your debt constant. Okay, so there's room for that, for refinancing the interest payments. But if the economy is growing, you can actually fully refinance interest. Now, the question is, okay, if you're financing capex, it's increasing growth, so it's still okay. But the problem is, what if over and above that, you still have a deficit? And that's the situation now. And of course, what Ben Diokno is saying is that they will cut the deficit 1% every year of GDP, and by the time the term of the president ends, it's going to be 3. So if that's true, we can all relax. But of course, I think Romy is the bigger expert here. How hard is that to do?
Very hard. But additionally, Governor, I wasn't going to ask this, but a lot of observers are rooting for government to be able to achieve the 6 to 8% target for the next 6 years. But considering the global headwinds and the so much more limited policy headroom, both fiscal and monetary, I guess, and I know government is sort of hoping that there could be new drivers for growth, like investments, PPP. But if that doesn't happen, then you're right. To your point, if your debt to GDP will explode. Your GDP is not growing. So what can be done in that situation?
Actually, it's very easy to stimulate Philippine growth. Very easy to stimulate Philippine growth. Okay, a lot of Filipinos are driven by hormones rather than long-term thinking. So the problem is if you do so
because they're young.
No, we're a very optimistic country. Okay, this is the thing I find about Filipinos. A fantastic look at surveys. Very negative about the current, but very positive about next 12 months. And that's true every survey. So that cannot be true, right? So we are a nation of incurable optimists. Okay, so that's good. My problem is if our growth monetary policy is pro-growth, but the countries we're trading with are not growing, and we are not attracting manufacturing FDI, then our exports will grow a lot slower. And then people will start asking question, will this use up the reserves of the central bank? Okay, of course the answer is it won't, because we won't sell. But then, what else will move, right? So the question there is really, how do we okay, for instance, you're familiar with this. Why is the Philippines such a popular place for locating bank services? That literally, for instance, if you look at JP Morgan, they have 16,000 employees.
We have 3,000.
Yeah, see, all of this, why are we so successful here?
Because we have the talent.
But why are we not successful in manufacturing?
Well, okay,
That's-
we are service-oriented, but for manufacturing, you need materials and processing.
No, but they can always come here, right? Those are
Yeah.
footloose, but they'd rather go to Vietnam.
Vietnam, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the things we have to answer. How do we have, okay, our friend Raul Fabella call it progeria. Because rich countries, old countries, have very little manufacturing, large services. We went directly to that. Yeah, so we look rich, but if you look at the share of services to total employment, we look old, like Europe. But when you look at the country itself, it's clearly, the economy itself is still young and small. So the question is, what do we have to do to attract? Because there are limits to...
You might have the answer, sir.
Yeah, okay, the answer is...
Because, like, there's the globalization, right?
The answer
So-
is, a simple answer.
What?
Have more Lilia de Limas, okay?
Yes,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, okay. To attract people to come in. But of course, I'm saying that, okay, we as a country must soul search and say, why did we use... Okay, if you take out food processing, less than 6% of employment is manufacturing. So how do we make that 12 at least, right? And
We should tell government.
no, I don't want to give advice to
Secretary
government.
Jacno.
If I give advice to the government, you give the advice, because if I advise the government what to do, they will advise me what to
Give
do.
the advice to Secretary Jacno.
May I ask a question which is more directly to central bank? And you probably heard this before because I see it in our Bible group in the past. No? They said the central bank is holding so much reserves and is getting a very poor return in prime securities, basically US Treasury bonds and so on. Why don't we use this in order to ease up on our foreign exchange constraint and be able to therefore grow more even during this difficult situation?
So effectively, what you're saying is maintain a high growth rate of output, which will cause imports to grow faster than exports, and the central bank will sell the dollars to prevent the exchange rate from depreciating.
Well, actually, more directly, they actually want to be able to use your reserves to put up a sovereign wealth fund.
Okay,
That
that's
will invest
I personally
at higher
think,
returns,
I personally think that's a terrible idea.
I
Okay.
thought the central bank was actually exploring that.
No. To
We
me,
shut it
okay.
down?
Okay, let me say this. Our reserves are comfortable but not excessive. Okay, second is, sometimes it's good to have more reserves than you need because the markets will listen to you. So for the markets to listen to you, you should be more than adequate. And okay, so to me, the solution, if you think that okay, the very nature of reserves, they must be liquid and very heavy principal protection. By definition, that's low returns, right? Because if you can find an asset that's safe, liquid, and it has high returns, the rest of the world are fools, right? You're the only one who found it, right? Okay, now, okay, safe, liquid, no returns.
But even
That's the function of reserve. So if you think that, say, well, okay, in any given crisis, the most that we will use is 40, why don't we invest the remaining 60 a little bit more aggressively? I think that is the better question. winning, should you let the central bank invest in foreign equities? By the way, it's no longer, it's not in the charter doesn't allow it to do it.
Yeah, okay.
Now the question is, if you ask me, do I want the power? Everybody will be second guessing.
That's why
me.
sovereign wealth fund. Malaysia. Like Malaysia.
Everybody will be by the way, I was talking to the Norwegian, they visited it, the Norwegian wealth fund.
Yes.
You know why they're interested in coming here? They like us so much. They said, oh, you're now one of the countries where your share of global market capitalization is our starting point for calculation of how much to invest in Philippines. By the way, they told me we're not, the general formula is because we like you a lot, your share in global GDP will be your share in our holding sovereign bonds. And then he said that the reason we don't like to buy the pesos is there's a 20% withholding tax.
That will be cured by Pepita.
Huh?
Hopefully. Right?
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the things that have to be solved. And but my point is, do I want to be in that position? You know what happened to them in the global crisis? All of a sudden, they were at a big loss. But nobody wanted them to be beheaded. Because they were able to explain to them, if we're patient, everything will bounce back. Now, the question is, if you put a central banker in that position, it so happens that he's holding shares. There's a really bad year that you cannot tell the people, I'm doing better than the benchmark, which really means I'm losing less than everybody else, right? So, so I wouldn't want that power if I were central bank governor, because I would like rather that nothing in my actions in investing reduces my credibility in my three pillars.
So, Governor, I have another question here from the floor. Nothing to do with economics, but still about banking. What is your view about reducing the number of banks? Apparently, this question is coming from someone who was not able to get the virtual bank license.
Okay.
So they want to find out, like, can an existing rural bank still apply for a virtual bank license? This is not coming from me.
Yeah.
Is the capital requirement for virtual banks is still, what is this English? But anyway, I think the person wants to have a virtual bank license.
Okay, why did we close the window? Okay, we closed the window.
There are so many.
We closed the window because, okay, what if it turns out that in this field is similar to Globe and Smart. There will only be 2 survivors. We really want that case because remember they're holding depositors now. So our worry is, is our regulation at this point good enough? So if we become more confident in our ability to regulate and spot problems early, then we'll be more open. Okay, so this is the reason we are reluctant to say, let a million flowers bloom, is that the bloom may create so much stink when it fades that we will be in trouble. So we're trying to be very cautious. Learn first. Learn first. And so far, we think six or seven? Six is enough. And we're observing the 6.
Does that mean that you will give a big bank like BPI a virtual banking license?
No, this is
You don't have to answer that.
no, this is just a titling. Because people are saying, for instance, ING could say, we do a lot of digital banking. Why can't we be called digital bank?
Because we're a universal bank. We didn't want to downgrade.
No, because our point is, we want to reserve the title for fully digital bank to fully digital bank, because we want that experiment as well. That experiment
Understood.
of
Understood.
So, Romy, the answer to your
Answered my question.
It's also no, and the answer to your question is also no.
no, but there's nothing,
Not yet.
nothing to prevent you, from putting up a very digital system, as long as you don't call yourself digital. Right? ING, right?
Yes, that's correct.
No, ING is hearing out. You see, the space may not be that large, right?
It is actually large and it's interesting. It's just an Asian strategy. So there's a question from the floor? Yes.
Good afternoon, Governor. I'm Ronnie Shasoyko of Trian Group and StratDev. Thank you very much for a very enlightening talk this afternoon. I've actually noticed that you've actually signaled to the market that you're going to be doing another round of rate increases in your next monetary board meeting. But how has, in the last few days, the 10-year yield in the US has actually broken the very strong support of 2.75. And this signals a rollover of the 10-year yield. And with the current situation where prices of commodities in the world, in the global market, is actually softening already, how will this affect your decision in the next monetary board meeting, considering that now you see the reversal of the 10-year yield, which is key to a lot of the things that's happening now in terms of inflation?
Well, you should be in the staff of the central bank. Oh, that's a very nice question. Okay, that's why I said not 0, not 75. So I'm not ruling out 0.25 either, right? Because I think that in real terms, it's still low. But remember what I said was for the rest of the year, we will be, and then maybe early next year, we will be actually looking very closely at data. In other words, it's not for sure. It's not for sure that what we will do in August, what we'll do next week or the week after, August 18, right?
Yes.
Is not the last.
It's not the last.
It's not for sure that it's not the last.
Okay.
Therefore, it could be the last. Okay.
Okay. Understand.
That's the hard thing about double negatives, you know. So
Economists are fond of that.
yeah. We want to confuse because sometimes when we are ourselves not sure, we should not sound too sure.
Understand.
And a famous quote from Paul Krugman is, "I'm worried. I'm beginning to understand Greenspan." Okay. So the point is, you're right. All the things you pointed out, which is, what if the U.S. recession is a lot deeper than we think it
Exactly.
will be? Therefore, the future could go either way. The other possibility is the inflation in the U.S. actually does not decline at all.
So that's stagflation.
Yeah. So these are all the things we are watching out for, and we are looking at our own inflation numbers even more. So our guess is that if you look at our forecast for July, by the way, this is very funny. We're forecasting last month. It's called nowcasting. The midpoint is around 6. Whereas the last inflation was 6.1. So we seem to be what we're seeing is that maybe it has already peaked, and then maybe it will go down.
Maybe it's tapering off.
But at the same time, so many things can happen, right? So that's why every month, every 6 weeks, it's a careful review of the data. And I'm right now not ruling out that it will be, let's say, 0.25 or 0.5 this week, and then maybe all zeros later on, or maybe some zeros and some 25s. So that's how little, that's why we're waiting for the data to be more sure.
Sir, you did mention earlier that you wanted government to encourage more FDI in manufacturing to be able to raise more exports. At the moment, what's this? Our trade deficit is about 10% of GDP. And that's a lot. Can you imagine every 1% of that trade deficit that we knock off is another additional 1% GDP?
Yeah, but okay, I just corrected that. Remember, we have a large trade in goods deficit and a large surplus in services,
That's true.
and then of course a very large surplus in income remittances.
Yes, from
So that
net factor income
so
from
that
abroad.
in spite of the large trade in goods services, our current account deficit, in fact, we had surpluses. Right? Now the current account deficit was supposed to be small, but because of the high prices of imports, it's now large. So that is
I understand.
that's the problem.
No, I was just focusing more on the trade deficit
Yeah.
itself, no?
why-
Because you mentioned about
Yeah.
manufacturing FDI.
Yeah.
Now-
I think the question is, why is our trade, why is our export of goods only about slightly more than half
Yes.
about our export of our import of goods?
Go
Why
ahead.
are we not exporting more
More.
goods?
Exactly.
And the answer to that is why aren't FDI in manufacturing a major force in the Philippines?
Can it be both? I mean, there is such a thing
I
as
think, Gov, you have to hire him in your economic
there's such a
team.
thing as
You completely understand each other. Some of these are going
there
to
is such a thing as monetary policy. Sir, just to finish off now, monetary policy as well as, of course, government policy in terms of investment. At this point, you as governor of Central Bank, of BSP, is in control of monetary policy. Of course, we are hoping that our finance secretary would be a lot more investment friendly and become a lot more open-minded as far as FIRB is concerned. No? But in terms of monetary policy, our current exchange rate is actually encouraging a lot of manufacturing investments. If I were to look at it in the long term, a rate of 55 currently, 55.50, could actually make our exports a lot more competitive in the global market. So don't you think maintaining this level of exchange rate is something beneficial for our exports in order for us to improve our trade deficit in terms of manufactured trade goods? So this is where I think your position as BSP governor could help in encouraging FDIs in manufacturing.
You sound like my favorite economist, Raul Pabella.
I told you, Gov, you have to hire him already.
But my response is, whether I agree with you or not, I'm not gonna say, because it could influence markets, and I'll be blamed. I could hear Butchako saying, "Oh, there goes Medalla again, speaking like a professor rather than a central bank governor." Okay, so permit me to do a Greenspan, which is answer without answering.
As the saying goes, all good things must end. We now call the present time for the presentation of the certificate of appreciation. Thereafter, I will be calling you in for the closing remarks.
Nice question, which I cannot answer. No, but it's always fun to be with Phoenix, right? Yeah. And F in Phoenix stands for fun, right? Fun and fellowship. Yeah, right. But I'm too old to join you. Okay,
So again, it's been a very fun and educational afternoon, Governor. So on behalf of the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, I would like to present our certificate of appreciation to Governor Felipe M. Medalla, PhD, in recognition for his generosity in sharing his valuable time knowledge and insights as a keynote speaker and our special guest on the PNEX Special General Membership Meeting. Governor will make sure to give you an extra cabinet to keep all of your certificates of appreciation from PNEX. So,
Well, I hope you will support the advocacies of the PNP.
and then one more. Siyempre, the certificate of appreciation would not be complete without PNEX handing over this art plate. It's called, well, we would rather that we open it at home. But it's care of the Fernando Omarsol Art Foundation. It's called Makati Skyline. And I came back to give this name.
May I now call on Ned, the Director in charge of programs and meetings, to deliver the closing statement. Thank you, sir.
On behalf of PNEX, we'd like to thank everyone who came over to join us this afternoon. Especially, we'd like to thank our guest speaker, the Honorable Governor Peter Dalla. Of course, our live members who joined us this afternoon, and of course, the Portland 100 on Zoom and Facebook. Thanks again to our live members. Thanks to our MC for this afternoon, Archie. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you on the 17th, right, for our next GNM. Goodbye, and that ends our program for this afternoon. Please.